So, welcome to episode 6 of Initiative by Diversify, Diversity and Inclusion in the Workplace. And this session is about allyship, power, and privilege. And, you know, those words mean a lot to all of us. They, very simple words, but with jam-packed meanings for most of us. So, this is really going to be quite an interesting conversation today. As per usual, I all like to say this is not a performance, it's a conversation. So we welcome interaction from all participants. We welcome any questions, any comments. I will do my best, along with the help of the amazing team from Herspace and Diversify, to catch all of your comments and your questions and refer to those and answer them. So thank you so much for joining us today. And before I go any further, I guess I should introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Hyacinth Walters-Olsen, and I am the founder of Yod Consult. And we specialize in wellness in the workplace workshops, as well as championing, human-centric, compassionate leadership for employees and entrepreneurs alike. So I would like to now come to our beautiful panel who are here today, and I'm going to ask our panel to introduce themselves. I always think that you can give the best introduction of yourself, however short, or I was going to say long, but preferably not long. You'd like to make it. I'll keep that long to maximum 90 seconds. We have a new panelist today in this series. So I'm going to throw her into the fire, baptism of fire, hallelujah. And we're going to ask you, Fungi, to be the first person to introduce yourself today. So welcome, first of all, foremost. Thank you so much for accepting the invite to join us today. And please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Hassan, for that lovely welcome and for throwing me into the deep end. And yes, I'm very pleased to be here today and look forward to this discussion. So my name is Fungi Guanzora. I'm Zimbabwean, and I work as an associate professor at the University of Bergen in the Department of Health Promotion and Development. I've lived in Norway on and off since 1996. I came as a student in the mid-90s. I left again after some years and lived in Scotland for about 8 years. And then I've been in Norway again since 2009. I am a mother of 3. And I like to say that although I work as an associate professor, my secret power or my passion is being a doula, which is birth support, which is the other thing that I do. But I guess it's going to be more about the job, my day job in this discussion. So yeah, that's a quick introduction from me. I hope that was quick enough.
That was perfect. Thank you so much. We love that. A doula as well. Gosh, a woman of many, many talents. Thank you. And then we'll come to you, Astrid.
Thank you, Hyacinth, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the pleasure of being a panelist here again today with you 3 women warriors. I'm really looking forward to the session. My name is Astrid Thun. I'm a Scandi Brit. I've been working in Oslo, Norway for about 9 years now, but I was born and bred in England, raised by an English father and Norwegian mother. As for my background, I've got a bachelor's in business and law from the University of Birmingham and a postgraduate in coaching, and about 20 years experience in leadership roles, specializing in the people and talent arena, as well as global recruitment programs in the STEM sector. So I spent the first part of my career on the more commercial side of the business, but in the last 10 years, I've gravitated towards more sort of HR roles. So employee experience, organizational culture, diversity, equity, inclusion, employee well-being. And for the last 4 years, I've been a chief HR officer for Shortcut, who are a tech company headquartered here in Oslo, but with offices in Copenhagen, Stockholm, Bergen, and Bucharest. But next week, I'm actually starting a new position. So I'm going to be joining a company called Alda, who were formerly Colonial, and I'm taking on a new role as their Director of Diversity and Inclusion. So as I said, really looking forward to today's discussion with the three of you, and thank you very much for having me back again. Thanks to the team at Diversify and Her Space for all the hard work you do behind the scenes too.
Wonderful. Thank you, Astrid. And massive congratulations on your new role. And I couldn't think of a better person stepping into that role. You're a real people's champion. So congrats. Congrats. And Chison, we are going to come to you. First of all, I'll say thank you so much, Chison, because this is one of your babies, being an initiative from Diversify. So thank you for this platform and for creating this arena for us to have these conversations. So hand the floor over to yourself.
Thank you, Harrison, and thank you all for being here and for engaging with us on it. And congrats again, Astrid. I'll probably keep telling you congrats for a while. My name is Chison Daisy. I am Nigerian. I am an economist. I am also the founder of Diversify and Her Space here in Oslo. I moved to Norway 4.5 years ago now. Previously, I lived in the US, spent a bit of my life there, and also about 10 years shuttling around Europe, the UK, the Netherlands, France, and now Norway. So happy to be here. I am very much enthusiastic and engaged in DEI, and I get very passionate about it. So I'm happy to be having this conversation, and I look forward to learning from the panelists as well as from everyone who's attending today.
Awesome. I would say enthusiastic is the perfect word to describe your love and joy for all things DEIB. So, thank you. Because of your vision, we're all here today being able to have this conversation. So thank you for your enthusiasm, Chison. Okay, before we go any further, I'd just like to tell you a little bit more about the format for today. Some of you have joined us previously, so you know that this is a 2-hour session. We're 12 minutes in now. And we aim to have around the first 90 minutes, these 12 minutes included, for a Q&A session with the panel, and then the last 30 minutes of the session is dedicated to our beautiful audience to answer your questions, and we will try to get to comments, etc., in between as well. So don't be shy. Throw it at us. Let's bring you in. We want to chat with you as well today. So I'm going to jump straight in. And due to the intersectional and intricate nature of the conversation that we're going to have today, I'm going to start by asking all three panelists to give us their definition of the three subject words that we're using today, which are power, privilege, and allyship. So Fungi, we can start with you. What does power mean to you?
Okay. As an academic, you can imagine that this is something that I talk about a lot, and that I teach about a lot, and that I discuss, and that I think about in my research. And one of the things that I didn't say in my introduction about myself is that most of my life, the work that I've done has been as a researcher, usually at universities, but once in a nonprofit organization. So the issue of power has been one that I have reflected on, and when I was asked to think about this, what does power mean to you? I thought there's power from the individual perspective, and then there's power from the structural perspective, which as a health promoter is how we look at how one promotes health, how one enables people to have control over their own health. So if you're looking for power from the individual perspective, it's the strength that you have within that helps you to achieve what you want to achieve, to push through the obstacles that you need to push through. And if you look at power from without, you're looking at the structures, the things in the environment that either facilitate you moving forward or that block you. And one thing that I wanted to say, just from how I work and how I think about power and how I teach power is about having voice, being heard, being seen, being listened to, having influence, and being able to affect change. So that, for me, those are some of the things that embody the idea of power.
Lovely. Thank you so much. I love that explanation from within and from without. I love that. Beautiful. Thank you. Astrid, we come to you. What does power mean to you?
Yeah, thank you, Synth. Power for me has mostly manifested, I think, for me, by seeing the power that men and the patriarchy hold in society and within the workplace. So in my lived experience and through my gaze, it has probably related more to the struggles and imbalances of power. And it's been a lifelong bugbear, probably in part why I support the feminist movement and why I feel allyship, especially towards women, because I've been on the receiving end of not having the power. And I think power is significant for me because it centers around this rights or lack of rights. And an example I can give here, which I thought back to one of the earliest examples of when power might have manifested. And I thought back to an example when I was about 10 years old, in which power showed up, because I was being bullied by an older boy at school, physically bullied, and he was threatening me with sexual violence, which, you know, we had one of those typical long school corridors. You can imagine it made walking down the corridor such a terrifying experience. So when I told my teacher, I think there were no repercussions for him. It just sort of made it even worse, actually. And that was my first, I think, reference or experience with power, because he had the power to threaten and intimidate me and the power to get away with it. And there's this other side of power, which I think is the more positive side. And that's the side of power that I think I enjoy using and embracing, which is where you can use your power to speak out, to address something that's wrong. An example of that will be that in my career and in my life and in my community, I try to use my power to support people in the workplace, sharing advice, contacts, connecting people, mentoring, etc., etc. But that's where it also gets confusing, because I don't want to turn myself into a do-gooder here, because I am in this underrepresented group of women in the workplace as a woman leader. But as a white woman, there's another layer to my power. So I'm conscious that I've derived my power through an alliance with the sort of predominantly white male corporate group of people who I interact with. So I'm also understanding the sort of sub-layers of power today, and acknowledging that I'm a woman who's experienced this inequality, power against me on the basis of gender, but also a woman whose power has been gained from this alliance.
Okay.
Yeah, so
thank you. Awesome. Thank you. I love that. A very thorough and in-depth explanation of what it means to you. You've really thought about that, which I like, that you haven't just gone, oh yeah, I believe power is this, but that you've actually gone through your life and looked at what it actually means to you. So I'm loving these perspectives that are coming at us. Chison, I'd just like to ask yourself, what does power mean to you?
I think both Astrid and Fungi have done a really great job, describing power. So what I can do here is also present it from my perspective and lived experience. I believe that power is my ability or capacity to do something, act in a particular way, influence behavior, or frame, direct or redirect the course of events. For me, I am acutely aware that my power lies in my abilities and my intersectionality. And in this regard, I am a woman, a Black African woman who is privileged, a mom, highly educated, passionate, fiery, etc., right? I'm also an employer. I have a voice which I consciously try to use when it counts. So thanks, Mom. I create space and I'm learning to take space, from a DEIB perspective. So from a diversity, inclusion, equity and belonging perspective, I engage actively in power and privilege analysis and training. So in this capacity, I like to explore power and privilege within a workplace or societal setting, looking at who has it and who doesn't. Of course, some of the end goals from this analysis is what are, empathy, allyship, and power sharing. What incentives can those who are privileged in their many various ways and powerful, what incentives do they have to share it? So this keeps me up at night. So here we go.
Wow, thank you so much, Chison. Wow, so we're one question in, and you can tell from the answers, just the panel framing what one word means to them, the quality and caliber of this conversation that we're going to have today. So welcome to everybody that has joined us since we started. Thank you so much for joining us. You have joined the Diversity and Inclusion in the Workplace, session 6, allyship, privilege, and power. So we're just framing now what those 3 words mean to each of our panelists, so as to set the tone for the conversation that we're going to have today. So I'm going to come back to you, Fungi, and what does privilege mean to you?
Privilege. Privilege means having advantages that others do not have, and then how you use these advantages. Do you use them to oppress, or do you use them to encourage and raise up others? And these privileges can be based on things like educational status, race, gender, ability, sexual orientation, and things like that. And when I was thinking about this question, it's something that I have been thinking about recently is, am I privileged? Because I know we're going to talk about other types of privilege coming up, but and I realized that I am privileged, and I've been thinking about how do I use my privilege? How can I use my privilege? So without going too much into detail, I'm going to say, yeah, that's how I see privilege. And I think for me, what's important about privilege is how we use it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Astrid, I'll come to you.
Yeah, again, I did some reflecting back to when did I first understand this concept of privilege. And when I sort of processed through the memory bank, it sort of took me back to, again, being a child. And I'm sure there are many other people that had this, but remember sort of not finishing your dinner and having parents that said, you know what I'm going to say, don't you? There are children starving in other parts of the world. And I think that's something, I'm pretty sure I've said it to my kids as well at some stage. I think that's something that we say to make our kids aware of privilege. I think we are aware of it, but then with my my work in this arena, in the people arena with DIB, I'm obviously looking at the more sort of deeper contextualized version behind privilege, how it works on a institutional and cultural level, how it favors or sort of gives these unearned advantages to certain members of society, and sort of how people in a dominant or majority group often believe that they've earned their privileges on a level footing. And I know that's something we're going to delve into a bit later on, because I think what interests me is how privilege comes with a degree of denial and a lack of awareness.
Thank you, Astrid. And then Chison, we're going to come to you. What does privilege mean to you?
Privilege is complex. So I'm going to try to compartmentalize it here. In my view, or at least one of my views on this, it has much to do with undeniable social advantages, benefits, or even levels of prestige acceptance, respect that an individual has by virtue of belonging to one or more social identity groups. In the West, for example, privileged social identities are people who have historically occupied positions of dominance over others, and they may include men, heterosexuals, Christians, the wealthy. But privilege does not only exist in the West, across the world, it takes various forms, from belonging to a favored ethnic group or religious sect to the beneficiaries of colorism or personality traits. And these are not mutually exclusive. They can occur in tandem. So a person can be male, white, rich, and heterosexual, hence the importance of intersectionality, which I will be talking about a lot today. So each and every one of us here today and everywhere else, we benefit from some type of privilege based on our intersectionalities, lived experiences, and local context. Whether we are aware of it or not, we can have privilege in one room and lack privilege in another room. So that's what I think.
Wow, that was deep. Privilege in one room and lack privilege in another. So true. The audience are loving the descriptions today. And so, thank you so much, panel. The audience are cheering you on, saying yes. Just for the sake of time, just to let you know, we've got 64 minutes left of this section. So I am going to ask you to be a little bit quicker in giving your final description, and that's on allyship. So Fungi, I'm coming to yourself.
Yes, allyship. It was, as I said to you guys earlier, this is a new word for me. Something that I know, but I didn't know there was a term for it. And I didn't know that there was a whole thing around it. Allyship is, for me, standing with others. So standing in support. So if you see that someone, depending either on their race, on their gender, on their youth, there could be a junior person in your workplace, on religion, various other things that we could name if we think of what Chison said about intersectionality. If you see that they are being disadvantaged in some way, to stand with them. And I think what's important with allyship is that you stand, and linking it to power, you stand in your own power so that you can stand with them. And by standing in your own power and knowing your own power, you can stand with them and support them, but not disempower and take their power away from them. So for me, that's how I've understood allyship.
Awesome, thank you, Fungi. Astrid?
Yeah, allyship. I struggled with this word a bit when it first came out. I'm not sure when that is, by the way, but I thought there was something a little bit white savior about it. But I think more recently, the term's been used very succinctly in the post-George Floyd era. And I think that I'm coming to terms with its definition and how important it is. And I'm actually currently reading a book called Demanding More by Cherie Atchison, and she does a brilliant section on allyship. And excuse me, but I'm going to quote one of her definitions because I think it's so much more articulate than I can put it. And she describes allyship as any person who actively promotes and aspires to advance the culture of inclusion through intentional, positive, and conscious efforts that benefit people as a whole. So what Cherie Atchison's description is saying is that when a person of a non-marginalized identity acts in solidarity or support towards people within society who have experienced marginalization, there's a voice that can be used to challenge oppressive systems. So allyship to me is about majority groups supporting and advocating for underrepresented or minoritized groups.
Lovely, thank you so much, Astrid. Love that quote. Chison, what does allyship mean to yourself?
So following up quickly, good segue from Astrid's last sentence. An ally is someone who uses their power and privilege to advocate for others. Allies are not members of marginalized groups. within a workplace or societal setting. You know, allies support Black, brown, and minority staff members, co-workers, and friends by trying to understand their lived experiences. Allies educate themselves on issues that affect people of minority groups. For example, you can insert trans people, women, people of color. Speaking out on injustice, educating colleagues, friends, and family members. Allies acknowledge their privilege, engage in uncomfortable conversations, and are actively anti-racist. I think with allyship, what is most important to me is it is not what you do in the moment, because you might freeze and lose your words or bearings when you experience a racist, homophobic, Islamophobic, or misogynistic encounter. I mean, how many of us here have gone home and thought about all the amazing witty comebacks we could have said to someone who said something, you know? So it's really what you do afterwards that counts. How do you bring up the conversation again and again? How do you learn? How do you relearn? So, yeah.
Oops, I was on mute. Everybody can hear me now. Okay, thank you so much, Chison. Just like to let everybody know, Astrid, there's been a couple of requests for the quote and the author, the book title. We will, as we always do, we do follow up at the end of each session with sending out a review and with all reference materials. So if there's anything that we miss giving you today, we will then follow up. Nikki on the team is like, yes, I'm on it. I started volunteering her to do that, and she wasn't even aware that that was something she was going to do. So she's queued up today. All right, lovely. So we're going to move on, and since we've touched on privilege, I'm going to ask the three of you this question again. What is, you know, we've heard about a lot about this now, especially the last year. What is white privilege, and how does it relate to allyship, privilege, or power? And I'll start with you, Chison.
Thanks, Hyacinth. In my view, white privilege is the belief that being white comes with unearned advantages and everyday perks that white people are often unaware of. So white privilege are advantages that a white person, you know, has solely as a virtue of their race in a society characterized by racial inequality and injustice. You know, for people new to this term, white privilege can arouse feelings of defensiveness at best and outrage at worst, I assume. The idea that a person could have special privileges just because of the color of their skin can be unsettling, and it can lead to feelings of shame and guilt and confusion, and understandably so. But there's really no need to feel shame or guilt. You know, in many societies in the West, white privilege does exist, you know, and as a white person, this does not mean that you're racist or that you take advantage of the systems or utilize this in a negative way. You know, it does not mean that you are personally responsible for the challenges that people of color or minority groups face. Like I mentioned, you may not even be aware of it. So this said, you know, if you're a white person and you feel that the concept of white privilege does not relate to you, you are likely mistaken. And this is where it gets complicated. So I like to simplify by stating that white privilege does not invalidate your struggles. It does not mean that you have not experienced discrimination, challenges, lack of opportunity, or poverty as a white person. It just means that your skin color is not one of the reasons why you have experienced them. And I think if we look at this and try to frame it on how it relates to allyship and power, you know, I think that acknowledging that white privilege exists is a start. Examine what is going on in your own life and how you promote and actively work to address it on an individual level. You know, listen to people of color when they share their experiences with you. Try not to take white privilege personally, you know, and if that term offends you, you know, sit with that discomfort and explore what why you feel that way. You know, talk to white people and talk to people of color about race, even if it makes you uncomfortable. And when you have the tools and the language for that witty comeback, or, you know, the ability to act afterwards, then use that power to advocate for and create space by being a bridge for the people of color and the minority groups in your life. So fostering a platform for inclusion.
Great, thank you so much for your description there. Astrid, I'm going to come to you now and put you sandwiched in the middle to answer this question.
Yeah, thanks, Hyacinth. This is a big question. That was a great answer, Chison. I mean, white privilege. Let's start with the obvious. I am racialized as a white person. I'm a white woman living in a country where people who look like me are in the majority. So, so that's sort of my relationship with white privilege. I don't have to worry about fitting in from an exterior point of view. I'm able-bodied, I'm middle class, cisgendered. So I have all these additional traits that benefit me because I'm in this majority group of privilege. And I suppose how I see this relating around the huge subject we're unpicking today is that white privilege is very much central to the systemic problem, because factually, white people are this race of people who came from Europe and have had a tendency, if we look in the history books, to think that they are biologically superior, examples of which we've seen: slavery, colonialism, apartheid, Jim Crow era, Black Lives Matter. However, I'm also a white privileged person who wants to know and understand about what that privilege means, how it works, how it manifests, how it favors some over others. And if I were to think of the two sort of biggest examples recently where it's played out in a horrible way, and two examples that spring to mind would be the privilege used in the Brexit vote, which was horrific. That was white privilege that won that vote. That was the horrendous media campaign depicting a problem with immigration. And of course, Trump's America, where I think white privilege was blatantly used to attack minority groups and demonize groups like Muslims and Mexicans. So those are the examples I can give in this short space I've got. I know we're going to talk about this a bit more, and just to sort of wrap it up, I'm both part of the problem, but someone who wants to be an active part of the solution by listening, learning, and absolutely acknowledging how my privilege plays out.
Thank you, Astrid. Fungi, we'll come to you.
I don't know what I can say after that, after this. I think the two of them really covered it pretty well. Okay, I'll give it a shot. White privilege. Well, I grew up in an apartheid-like system in Zimbabwe. When I was small, the system was apartheid, and then we had independence in 1980. There was still a lot of racism. So although we were the majority, and although we were ruling the country, we were still under the control of the minority. And that white minority had the power, they had the money, they had the privilege. And I was very aware of it from a young age, and I experienced it in many different arenas. And they had, and I think this is interesting because they saw themselves as superior and they saw us as inferior, you know, and that was kind of shown in many different ways. In class, for example, you know, I was in a school that was predominantly white, and our teacher, when you were reading, you know, you're reading a play, she would either skip the black girls or she would give you a one-liner, you know, because she didn't want us poor Africans to strain ourselves too much. So, you know, that's kind of what I grew up with, being told you are less than, and watch seeing the privilege that these other people had because of their skin color, not because of any, not that they were particularly more intelligent than we were, particularly gifted, but because of skin color, networking, they always came up on top. So that was one experience. And then of course, moving to Europe is very different, because now all of a sudden I was a minority surrounded by this white majority, but they did not, well, at least my experience in Norway, they have not lauded their white privilege so much. And in a way, are sometimes embarrassed by it, or very defensive. I think in Norway, I would say people are very defensive about their whiteness and their the privilege that they have because of their skin color. So for me, it's been it's been an interesting experience. And then I lived in Scotland, which was very different. Coming from Norway, where you could see how the privilege was used, in Scotland, it was very different. And in Scotland as well, not being more of a class-based society, I saw the poverty of the white people. And in a way, for myself as an educated Black woman, I was in a more privileged position. So again, now this was a different experience from Zimbabwe, where the majority of the white people were very privileged and knew their privilege and used it and wielded it, to now being in a country where you had the white people looking up at me and looking at me as the privileged one. So it's intersectionality again, as I'm sure Chison will tell us more about. But it is, so for me, it's not as simple and straightforward as it sounds. And I think it is one of these terms that is important that we are aware of, and we are aware of how power is wielded because of a person's skin color. For example, for some of us, like going through an airport, when I had a Zimbabwean passport, or just going through an airport with my white colleague, she would go through, I would be stopped without fail, and that's where allyship would come in, is, what does your colleague who has that privilege do to support you in that time? And I've had colleagues stand there and look aggressively at the border control until they've let me go. So I think it's a very interesting thing, but I think it's very multifaceted. And I think we have to look at it from different perspectives and look at where are we, what context are we in, and who are we talking about? But I think awareness is key here.
Wow, thank you so much. Well, you did a brilliant job answering. You didn't think you had anything to add, but you definitely did. In fact, you just triggered a memory for me. I remember being at college, and it was the first time that they'd had any ethnic minorities in their performing arts course. I was one Black girl, two Black guys, and we were doing this play, and everybody turned up, everybody was given a role, and I was the last person. And I asked the teacher, okay, so what am I going to be doing? And he said, well, you can open and close the curtains. And I was like, oh, thank you. And everybody laughed, cried with laughter, like slapping the floor with laughter. And I just stood there like, oh, great, thanks. Anyway, swiftly moving on. Astrid, I'm going to come to you and throw you back into the fire again. How does a denial around white privilege manifest?
Okay, that's a big one. White privilege. Here we're talking about skin color, and I think one of the biggest problems is that many people perceive this terminology of white privilege as being anti-white. And the way I look at it is that white people don't really have to discuss racism all that much, if at all. They certainly don't have to think about it on a day-to-day level, or live in fear of any racial discrimination, because it's just not something that happens. Being white-skinned means that you will not be impacted by judgment or discrimination on the basis of your skin color, right? So the common approach when it comes to this denial around white privilege is, for some white people, to hear that it is their skin color that's being discriminated against, and it spirals into this suggestion that they're being shamed for being white. That's actually something that falls into the box of white fragility, and that's a different, too big and deep to unpick here. But it basically happens when white people reverse the roles and say they're the victims instead. And deeply problematic. Many examples of it sort of in the media. You may have, some of the audience here today may have even experienced it firsthand themselves. And what's very common is that some white people insist white privilege doesn't apply to them because they're not wealthy, or because they've suffered hardships, or because they've worked hard and their life has been a struggle. And that's where it gets a bit twisted, because struggle absolutely unites us, you know, it should. But in these terms of white privilege denial, it doesn't. It polarizes us. And that white people also experience poverty, discrimination based on socioeconomic status or class, that exists is not a reason to, what's the word I'm looking for, to weaponize or undermine the experience of racism. And it doesn't mean that every white person leads a charmed and privileged life. So white privilege isn't to say that we can't cultivate common ground in our discrimination, but monopolizing it is wrong. So I try and explain, articulate it in a different way. I can understand discrimination from a gender point of view. I've experienced it. You know, I mentioned the bully boy at school, for example, so I can empathize with anyone who's been a victim of violence, gender-based discrimination. But I can't locate this experience with racism or racial discrimination, because it's just simply never happened to me. So the same white people who get defensive when they hear the term white privilege, to me, it's because they don't understand. They don't understand the complexities, and they're taking it the wrong way. And my interpretation is that white privilege doesn't necessarily, it's not an insult. It's not an accusation. It's not saying this is your fault. It just means that you won't experience personal, professional, societal hurdles based on skin color. So when white people dismiss the advantages of whiteness, that arrogance in itself is white privilege doing the talking.
Okay, thank you so much, Astrid. Thank you. Fungi, I'd just like to come back to you. So you're talking about your experience in Glasgow. And so in that context, you said that you felt like the privileged person, having an academic background. So is there such a thing as Black privilege?
Yes, good question. And again, something that I've been thinking about. And at some point I thought there is, because I thought, you know, look at me, I'm doing okay. I'm well educated. I've got a permanent position. I've got my own house. I'm very stable financially, you know, and I know there are a lot of people who have a lot less than I have. So I have privilege. But then when we look at it, and we look at it from, then I thought about it again, and we're looking at it, like, for example, from what Astrid just said, if this is about race, if this is about the color of your skin, do we as Black people actually have an advantage because of our skin color? Well, we don't age as quickly, we don't wrinkle as quickly, that's an advantage. We don't burn in the sun, that's an advantage. But really, when we get serious about it, no, we don't. There is no such thing as Black privilege. I did think about it, and I thought, is there anywhere? I mean, really, is there anywhere where I would get major advantages because I'm Black, or where people like myself and Chison and you, would come in and it would be like, you know, people wouldn't notice us. You know, we just, well, maybe we would back in, you know, Zimbabwe or Nigeria, or, you know, but do we really then get advantages from that? The things that Astrid talk about, do we still go through airports and we still get looked at funny? We still walk into certain spaces and we still get looked at funny. We still get, in some places, we get followed around in the shop because it's assumed that we're going to be shoplift. I mean, if you think about the example of Oprah in Switzerland, I mean, that's somebody who is famous and a multi-millionaire. And what happened to her? Does she have Black privilege? No. She's rich, she's educated, she's famous, but still, what was important there was the skin color. So, no. Sadly, there is no such thing as Black privilege.
Okay, thank you. Chison, just like to ask you the same question. Would you say, is there any such thing as Black privilege from your perspective?
So I'm gonna stand firmly with Fungi on this one. Do Black people have privilege? Absolutely. Due to my intersectionality, for example, I am very aware of my privileges in society. In some settings, I have more privileges than many people, white, Black, brown, whatever you identify as. But if we take it back to the definition, you know, if we look at white privilege as that your skin color is not one of the reasons you face challenges, by that definition, has skin color being one of the reasons why Black people or myself have experienced any type of challenge? Absolutely. So without a doubt. So by this definition, I don't think there is such a thing as Black privilege, but Black people have privilege for sure.
Okay, thank you. I beg to differ slightly because I know that in a lot of Caribbean, African countries, just the tone of your skin gives you privilege. So if you are light-skinned, you have way more privilege than a dark-skinned Black person, and so then your skin color does make a difference as a Black and Black person in a Black country. So that's my personal opinion, but I understand what you mean in the whole general context on a worldwide basis. Then I understand what you mean.
And if I could jump in just quickly, and what you discuss exists, because I also see it in Nigeria, because in Nigeria we have all these different ethnic groups and different skin colors. I mean, in my family alone, there are 4 of us, and we all have different skin tones. And my sister, who's quite light-skinned, you know, was always the pretty one and got favored in that sense. But in that situation, it doesn't really have much to do with race. It's about colorism, and that is rampant in even a lot of Black communities and societies to this day. It's the reason why people bleach their skin. And when they do, they become favored in society. So just wanted to create that nuance as well.
Thank you. Yes, and Emma was answering that as well about the colorism. And yes, I guess, yeah, how you define it, the terms, I bow to your knowledge. Right, so moving on, I would like to ask the 3 of you this question now. When was the first time you realized that you had power and privilege, and how do you negotiate that in your personal and professional life?
Anyone?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I'll jump in. So I think about this quite often, power and how I have it, how I wield it. To use power, you need to know to some degree that you have it. You know, I have many stories and realizations from many firsts as an intersectional human being. But I think my first memory of having power, I was authorized by a power figure, my mother. You know, I was barely 10, and my mom was having some politically charged discussions with her friends. And anyone who's African here knows that when elders are talking, you don't talk, right? And she asked me, Chison, what do you think? And I was just floored. I don't even recall what I said. But I recall that she created space for me to speak and be heard in front of elders. It was the first time I truly realized that I had a voice, that I could use it, and that somebody would listen. You know, and on privilege, you know, to be honest, I was kind of born into it. I had access to good everything, you know. I was afforded a great education. I traveled to many countries. I had most things I wanted. I was well aware, you know, that there were many people in the world who did not have access to what I had as a child. My mom made sure to remind me, and, you know, Astrid talked about that, you know, there are kids somewhere who need this food, You know, so in some way, I have always known I have privilege. My experience with privilege has, of course, evolved, but it does not invalidate the life I was born into and the upbringing I had, which has shaped my worldview, my disposition, my tenacity, and on how I negotiate them on, like, say, I do so on a case-by-case basis. So when do I speak up? When do I not? In the workplace, in society, when do I create space? When do I take space? How do I facilitate empowerment and power for my team? How do I include them? Where do I fail? Where do I excel? And what can I learn from each interaction? It's a process. Ultimately, I endeavor to be steadfast to my values and to contribute to a just society and environment for my family, my team, and loved ones. But this does not make me a saint. Have I abused or taken advantage of my power and privilege in the past? Absolutely. Have I made mistakes as a leader? Yes. Does that make me an awful person? No. Do I still have blind spots, and does ego get in the way sometimes? Yes. So I'm a work in progress, and I aim to continue to be in progress.
Yes, just like all of us, like all of us. I would just like to say there's an interesting conversation happening in the chat about colorism, and thank you, Emma and Marta and everybody who's commented there. You know, I like what Emma said here. It's a bit of a shock to realize that these issues are not just inflicted on us, but that they become internalized so that we inflict them on ourselves and others. So true, so true. Astrid, I'd like to come to you now. When was the first time you realized that you had privilege and power, and how do you reflect that in your day to day?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Hyacinth. I was very lucky to have the parents I have as role models, because mum and dad did a lot of work in the community, a lot of volunteer-led work. My mum was special needs worker, so she worked with children with learning disabilities. They were foster parents. So we fostered, and we also did sort of weekend placements where we had children from children's homes coming over. I definitely know my brother and my sister and I, we used to complain and go, oh no, not again, is there someone else coming at the weekend? And I guess that was us being privileged. And my parents did that because I guess they just had this need, this want, this passion to want to give something back. And they're brilliant parents. They love children, are both very arty and creative, and I'm very grateful for that now. That has probably made me into who and what I am today. That from an early age I understood. Look, and we weren't well off. My parents were sort of lower middle class, okay salaries. Mum didn't work till I got a lot older because she did childminding and the fostering work. So that was, I think, when I first realized. And like millions of other people in the 1980s, there was another realization for me about privilege on different continents. And I know you'll remember this as well, Hyacinth, because we're similar ages. And that was in 1984 when a very well-known concert called Live Aid was organized. And this was huge because it was watched by millions of people. It was in response to the Ethiopian famine, and that was, I think, my first real understanding of poverty, famine. You know, I think we did sponsored, we did these sponsored like mini kind of, what do you call it? Wouldn't call it a mini famine, but we didn't eat for 24 hours because we were supposed to learn what it's like to be hungry. And I still remember it now. And let's not go into Bob Geldof and the millions of money that was possibly squandered into the wrong hands in Ethiopia, because that's another discussion. But I think that those are the earliest experiences I can remember when I go back and sort of look through that lens. And then, you know, an interest grew for me. My mum borrowed a book from the library for me, which was about apartheid. That's why I find Fungi's experience very interesting. I was about 10 years old and read a book about a white girl and a black girl in South Africa and how their friendship was torn. And I don't remember the name of the book, but I think it just opened my eyes up that even at 9 years old, I couldn't resonate with how unfair the world was. So every new nugget of information throughout my teens, from learning about apartheid, slavery, segregation, you know, opened my eyes to this existence of a sort of, you know, an extremism, I suppose, and has made me conscious, and I am still conscious that I had and have privilege because of the color of my skin. And the second part of the question was how to negotiate this in the workplace. I'm still understanding and learning a lot about what the privilege of being a white woman means, what it affords me, as well as how I can use it to promote or call out, transform. So it's continuous learning. I think that's the thing that's coming up time and time again today. And I suppose it's one of the reasons that I've naturally gravitated towards being on discussion panels like this and really being passionate about this area of DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging within the workplace.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And yes, you're quite right. The continual learning is a thing that's repetitive here, and as Marta has said in the comments as well, the power of reading. You were saying about that book, and gosh, I know that so many books have impacted me throughout my lifetime. Remember, I used to hide away from my grandma, who'd be looking for me to do some chore or another or feed me, and I'd be under my bed with a book like this, just hiding away. So Fungi, I'm going to come to you. We are now 1 hour in. We have 30 minutes left of this section. I've got lots more questions that I would like to throw at the three of you. So I'm going to ask you, Fungi, and then I'm going to ask you some individual questions. So Fungi, when was the first time that you realized that you had privilege and power, and how do you use that in the workplace and in your personal life?
Okay, I guess like Chison, there's some similarities there. I grew up with privilege to a certain extent. My parents were not rich. They were both teachers, but they were both educated. And in a way, they were the first generation of Africans who had been to university. And that was the only university in Africa at that time. And this must have been in the 50s, which was Fort Hare in South Africa. So that's where they met, and that's where they were both educated. But I think just growing up with parents like that, they instilled certain values in me. They instilled a love of learning. So the whole reading thing, I love to read. I've always loved to read. But they also instilled a certain pride in me. Although we were living in a system where Black people were looked down on, being called an African was almost like an insult, right? It was, you were lesser. They still instilled this pride in who I am as a Black Zimbabwean. And I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of, for example, of having a Shona name, because many of my contemporaries have English names because it wasn't the thing. You had to have your colonialized English name. So they instilled that pride in me, which I have carried throughout my life. So for me, growing up educated, and they made this effort to send me to the very best schools. They didn't have a lot of money, but they sacrificed, which did give me that advantage, and which made me very aware of that advantage, because of course these schools told you that we are the best school, you're the best, and this has helped me make my way throughout the world since I've left my home country. So that was the privilege that I got from an early age. And with it, of course, comes a certain amount of power. I remember the first time I employed someone. Now, back in Zimbabwe, we all have housekeepers. And just employing that housekeeper, having her in my home, I had a little son at that time. But how I treated her was because of the way that I had seen my parents treat people who were not as privileged as they were, because I treated her with respect. Other people, the poor house help would be working until midnight, or if they had visitors until the wee hours and then having to clean up. But I always looked at her as a person and as someone worthy of respect. And that has carried on into my work life. when I think about how much power I have in my work life, I guess a bit here and there, but basically in how, when I look at people, when I work with people, I always deal with them in a professional way, because I'm always aware that they are people that deserve respect. I have done all sorts of things in my life. I've worked in a hotel as a cleaner at one time after finishing my master's degree here in Bergen. And that made me realize that when people look at you, they don't see you. They see, oh, there's a Black woman cleaning. They didn't see my master's degree. So, you know, that was a hard lesson. So ever since then, I've always seen people, regardless of what they do, they're doing something that's important. So yeah, the lessons that I've learned in my life and the privilege that I have helped me to be able to see people and to respect people regardless.
Yeah. That is so important, to see people, such a simple thing, but so overlooked so many times. I will not share more stories. I was about to share a story, but due to time, I will move on. Astrid, I'd like to ask you about allyship. And could you potentially give us some examples of companies that are getting it right when it comes to allyship? From your knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of applause for companies like Accenture and Cisco. Why is that? Diversity of leadership. I think at Accenture, it's something like 33% women executives in the whole global group, and 42% of their executives are from minoritized groups. They've got a Black Founders Development Program. Cisco, I think, claim to have achieved 50% of their workforce from minoritized groups, which is, I mean, that is super commendable. And I think honorary mentions for Ben and Jerry's, the ice cream makers. They've been really, really supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement. They've come out with some really bold statements, and the outpouring of customers that said, "I won't buy your ice cream again," they were just like, you know, to them, it was really, really cool to watch their stand, their allyship. And also a newcomer, I would say, is Netflix. I think Netflix in the last few months have made some big strides with not just their DIB program, but with allyship, with their content, focusing more on a thorough representation of different ethnicities. They've got a fantastic VP of inclusion. I forget the name now. Is it Werner Myers? I think, is it? Yeah. So I think they're 3 companies to watch when it comes to, you know, big global workplaces who are nailing allyship.
Yeah, fabulous. And Stan has commented as well to let us know that GE, General Electric, that they've been pretty successful as well with ally programs. I know that McKinsey recently rolled out a huge program as well. They've got like this whole 12-step program of really sponsoring, supporting, and uplifting, you know, people from ethnic minorities within their corporation. So, and they're doing a lot of sponsorship as well, which is great. So, Fungi, I'd like to ask you, how can leaders recognize their power, and how can they activate it to the positive benefit of others?
Yeah, when I was thinking about this, I thought, you know, there's a saying that some achieve great, some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. And I think that also applies to leadership. And my experience is, of course, from the academic field, where you get people who are good leaders naturally. And then you get people that work to become leaders, and then you get those that just are thrown into it and flounder. And I've had a lot of experiences of those who flounder, where they're basically not knowing how to lead and end up just giving everybody a hard time. So how can leaders recognize their power? Once you are in a position, now we're talking about, for example, in a workplace, once you are in a position where you have people who are under you, where you have responsibility basically over other people, then you are in a leadership position. And good leadership requires you to acknowledge this, that you have a responsibility to those people under you. And to be able to lead well you need to have self-knowledge. You need to know your own weaknesses. You need to know your strengths. You need to be able to look around you, look at your team and see who is good at what and not micromanage. I've often seen people not good at stuff, taking on all the responsibility. It all ends up a mess, and then they take out all their frustrations and they overwork on their subordinates or on their co-workers. So I think that's really important. So if you know yourself and know that, okay, I'm really organizing is not my best thing, but I know so-and-so is really good at it, then get so-and-so to do it because they probably love it. Let them do it. And that does not take away from you being a leader, because leadership is not about control and domination. It's about spreading out the workload. And then, yes, in the end, you usually have to make the final decision, but make a final informed decision, having listened to your people and taken their wisdom, and then come up with the final decision. So that's just my perspective from an academic perspective. And I think if you have a leader who does that and who actually shows that they trust you, then you are willing to work harder, you're willing to do a better job, because you feel that I'm part of something. I'm not just resisting, which we have done a lot of times, that we've just resisted because the leadership has been terrible and they have not been leading by example, or at least not by a good example anyway. So I think self-awareness, self-knowledge, and trusting the people that you're working with, having confidence in the people that you're working with, I think is the way to go to be a good leader.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I'd just like to say to the audience listening in, we've got 20 minutes left of this section, and so please prepare your questions. In fact, what I would like to do today is something that I don't usually do. I would like you to potentially ask your own question to the panel. So if you would like to ask a question, you can just put in the chat, I would like to ask a question, and I'll come to you and give you the opportunity to ask your question. If you don't want to come on camera, that's fine. You can just type your question into the chat and I'll read it out for you. Okay, so you've got two options there. All right, so Chison, you're sitting looking all beautiful there. And no, we're not going to allow you to relax and sit this one out, so I'm coming to you. What does empowerment mean to you, and how have you leveraged it in the workplace?
Thank you, Hyacinth. Confession, I used to have a problem with empowerment, mainly how it's tossed around, about, oh, I want to empower people, or this less privileged people, let's empower them. I think it takes a level of arrogance to think you can just kind of show up and poof, people empowered. But within a workplace setting, I think for me, empowerment means having the power, the confidence, the ability, and the authority to do something. And I leverage this in the workplace. Firstly, by creating space. I'm going to talk about my team, my Diversify and Her Space team. And they're here so they can correct me if I'm wrong. Feel free to tell the truth. I leverage it in the workplace, firstly, by creating space for others and actively working to positively contribute to the strength, power, sense of self, and confidence of my team. Now, I don't always get an A+ on this. Sometimes it's an F-, if that's possible, but it's a work in progress nonetheless, And for me, by giving them room to make mistakes, we tend to laugh at mistakes, especially when there's nothing we can do about it, encouraging them to take the lead, sharing their opinions, and make decisions that I follow. Even if I don't agree, at the end of the day, majority wins. And if on my team says, what won this? I'm like, okay, I don't think so, but I'm behind this, right? But I also leverage its empowerment in the workplace by respectfully but firmly challenging them when necessary and communicating my belief of their continuous professional and personal development, and my financial and otherwise support of those endeavors to the best of my abilities. On a personal basis, I'm leveraging empowerment by taking space. I haven't always taken space. I struggle with taking space. Oh my gosh, do I have to post that thing about myself? I'm terrified, right? But I'm beginning to realize that my playing small does not serve the world. It doesn't serve the Black women who are looking at me. It doesn't serve my daughter. So my fear, my discomfort with taking space takes a back seat to my need or my wish for my daughter to take every type of space, smash down buildings and mountains. So I practice empowerment to be an example to my daughter to take space and dealing with the discomfort of being uncomfortable, and also allowing myself to be challenged by myself, by my team, and also in following their lead. So yeah.
Wow, wonderful. Children have that effect on us, eh? Thank you so much, Chison. I love that. Fungi, I'd like to ask you the same question about empowerment, and Chison so beautifully answered it from a personal and employer perspective. How about from an academic perspective?
Yeah. Again, this is really, I agree with Chison. It's a term that's been thrown around and misused, especially with researchers and people going out into different contexts and applying their will and saying that they're empowering people, meanwhile they're actually disempowering people. So my perspective in my work and my research, in my work with students, is enabling people to find power in themselves. So my research focuses on migration, and we focus on people who came to Norway as refugees. Why? Because we have found that usually these people are treated as victims, as people with no, with nothing, basically, nothing to offer. They just have to be taught how to be and taught how to live and taught how to behave. And we come at it from a completely different perspective, where we see them as people with strengths, with resources, because damn, they've made it from wherever, through how many countries, through how many challenging, harrowing experiences that we can't even imagine. And they've landed here, they're settling, they're making a life for themselves. And instead of looking down at them and looking at them as victims, yes, they have trauma. Yes, they have, various challenges, but we start with what got you here? What is it that made you go through all those countries, helped you to survive, whatever boat you were on, helped you go through the different borders and get turned back and keep coming, get your family safely over here. What was it? Because that is what is going to help you make it to Norway. You need to draw on that strength. So for me, that is helping people to find the power within themselves, enabling. I love the word enabling. And we're standing there saying, you know what? I don't know anything. I don't know your experience. Your experience is yours. But I know you have something. What is it? And how can we find it together? And also by encouraging people who work with these groups to start looking at them in that perspective, to say, can we start with strengths instead of looking at the problems? Because the problems are there. That's fine, but if we start with the strengths, sometimes it's going to help to get rid of or minimize some of the problems, because we're seeing them, we're hearing them, and we're helping to take them forward. And I have the same approach with my students. Is I always say to them, okay, so what can you do? Because you tend to be very dependent. Tell me, feed me like little birds. And I'm like, no, but this is your work. What do you know? Come on, give it a go. So I work as a facilitator, and in that way, I think that helps to empower by facilitating so that people grow and learn. You are there as a support, but you're not telling them what to do or how to do it. But you're saying to them, you have it within you, and I'm here to facilitate and maybe help nudge here and ask a question there. So that's from my academic perspective of how I work. That's
wonderful. Beautifully and eloquently put. Thank you so much. Adebayo commented and said, empowerment in the workplace is creating successful entrepreneurs out of every employee. I really love that, and that is so true. Okay, so Astrid, I'm going to come to you, and let's assume that you're in the workplace and there's a person from a minoritized or underrepresented group and they're facing discrimination. How can we use our privilege or allyship to show up for that person as a colleague?
Yeah, okay, thanks for the question, Hyacinth. And thanks also, Fungi, for your answer just previously. I thought that was lovely. I really want to come and work for you. You sound like an amazing, amazing leader. Back to the question. This happens. It's rife. I've seen it. I've seen it and not called it out. I've seen it and I have called it out. I've had people report it to me because obviously I'm working in HR, so it's not unusual for discrimination allegations to happen. Most often I've seen it under the sort of label of gender discrimination or sexual harassment. Speak out, call it out. That's what I'd say. Speak up, stand by your morals, be fearless, talk to someone before you have the conversation with the person or your leader or HR. The shame and regret of not doing something, I believe, is worse, far worse than the discomfort and embarrassment of speaking out. If you're in a Norwegian workplace and for any reason fear reprisals, you can do a complaint or a bekymring sort of completely anonymously. You can go to an employee representative and your name does not then need to come into it to speak about the behaviour you've witnessed. You can also report issues of concern to the LDO, Likestillings- og Diskrimineringsombud. They can offer advice in situations. But if it's rampant discrimination, if you're in a workplace that has multiple levels of discrimination, then it's most likely it's a toxic workplace. And toxic workplaces are very bad for your health and well-being. So if it's that bad, then you need to consider leaving and going somewhere else. Leave it behind you. That's what I'd say.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to continue moving forward. We have 9 minutes left of this section, and I really just wanted to revisit something that we mentioned quite early on. And so, Chison, I'm going to come to you and just ask you, could you just revisit intersectionality and how it, intersects with privilege? If you could do that for us in no more than 3 minutes. And I know that might be difficult because it's a huge topic, but for time.
Okay, I'm gonna see if I can maybe even do it for last and keep it really simple. Perfect. So maybe the best way to describe intersectionality is to use myself. I am Chison, I am Nigerian, I am a woman, I am Black, I am African. I've grown up with money. I studied in the US, lived in the UK, lived in the Netherlands, married to a white man, have a biracial daughter. I own a business. I hire a lot of people, many of them from different countries, all of them from different countries, actually. A lot of them whites, very aware that my team needs more Black people. I have faced racism on the train in Switzerland. I have been called a Negro. I have walked into rooms where people are waiting for my approval to actually get a job or get a contract, and they thought I was the help. I make multi-million-dollar decisions. I struggle with speaking up sometimes. I have been flawed. Someone has walked into my space at her space and said the most ridiculous things to me, and I couldn't find the words to respond. So I went home, and being the crazy person I am, I wrote him an entire email to tell him why all of that was wrong. I existed for a significant part of my life only having friends who had skin color and experiences different from mine. And only in the past couple of years have I actively sought out people who looked like me just to get to know them and get to know myself a little bit more. I am powerful. I offer people jobs. I pay them a salary. But I'm so afraid every time, sometimes when I walk out of my house, how people might look at me, how people might judge my child. I'm acutely aware that my daughter is biracial, but the world will see my daughter as a Black woman, and I'm tasked with a responsibility of raising her to be a warrior, and I don't know how to do that, and I'm scared, mindless. But I am privileged. More than most. I have access to things, to resources that many don't. And every single day, I have to negotiate all these different people. What the world expects of me, what my team expects of me, what my husband, my child, my mother, my family-in-law, and how to navigate coming into my power as an angry Black woman and not run away from what that means. These are my intersectionalities. So intersectionality is everything that you are. It is your lived experience. It is nature and nurture. It is the media you've been exposed to. It's the friends you have. It's the food you eat. It's the culture you were raised in. It's all of it and how it shows up in your life. You know, being fully aware that I am a straight woman. I don't wear a hijab. That gives me privilege. I don't know what you think, but I think I'm beautiful, and that gives me access to places.
You are stunning,
right?
girl. You are stunning.
So just saying that it's everything that we are. We are never just one thing. And every single day, whether or not we are conscious of it, we make these negotiations. For some of us, if you live in my skin, or if you live in a brown skin, or if you wear a hijab, or if you're, Middle Eastern man, it might be at the forefront of your consciousness. But you could also be a white woman or a white man with all this privilege, and you still have these intersectionalities. So that is what intersectionality is and how it intersects with privilege. Sitting with all of that and coming into that power, being able to name your fear, your struggles, your challenges, and also where you thrive. And using whatever that intersectionality is or whatever that power is to speak truth to power, to create space for people, to fight for the people that you love. And hopefully, maybe we'll have a better society. So how's that for 3 minutes? I'm not sure if I went over.
Yes, you did, but that was We Are All Now Taking a Bow. Chison, that was phenomenal. Beautiful, very candid, lovely, eloquent, all of the above. It was spectacular. Thank you. And so I'm not even going to continue with many of the other questions that I had. I'm going to finish by asking what I always like to ask, which is to give a takeaway for the audience. 3 top tips for using your power and your privilege to be a better ally in the workplace. And Fungi, can I start with you?
Okay, for me, it's always quite simple. You start with yourself. Be self-aware, be aware of your power, be aware of your privilege. So take the time to gain self-knowledge, to look in the dark places and see who you really are, because until you know that, you can't be of use to anybody. And I'm going through that job that I'm working through with myself at this time, although I'm 50 something. Be curious and be open when you meet people who are different from you. Be interested. Ask respectfully if you don't know, and be sensitive. And don't get offended if you get an answer that you don't like. Don't get offended if you get a reaction, but just at least be interested. I think that's one of the things that I've often missed, is people not being interested. And the third is linking to being interested, is to listen mindfully, really listen and really see the other person. Really see them and hear them. Don't see and hear what we often start a conversation in our heads when somebody's talking and we don't really hear what they're saying. So really take that time to hear what that person is saying, not what you want to hear, and to really think about what they're saying. So I think that's just being present with other people. I think for me, that's the start to everything. I think once we sort that out, then everything else falls into place.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Astrid, can we come to yourself?
3 top tips. I'm going to sort of try and blend them all together, I think. Take note of the people in your workplace who are not a member of a majority group or in your community, and be an ally. Just start with that. A cup of tea or a glass of wine. Support, show up, listen, ask questions. In the workplace, it's efforts like these that will create one of these work environments whereby underrepresented people can feel supported. And these kind of actions, they have a really magical ripple effect when people start to follow your lead. So become a better ally, because this will also help you overcome your conscious and unconscious biases, something which will make you a better and more inclusive leader, a more decent human being all round. And remember that change is an active process. Nothing will change unless we change it. And positive allyship is such a great gateway to change.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Chison, we're going to close out with you, your 3 top tips, please. And then we're going to come to the audience. Some questions are coming in now, which is great. So Chison, if you just close out this section for us.
Thank you. I think Astrid and Fungi have done a great job. So just to summarize, I think acknowledge that there is a problem, usually. Listen to the people who are experiencing those challenges, learn from them, and do so with humility. Assess your privilege, and then do the work. You can't depend on people facing challenges or minority groups to share their trauma for your education. So confront as well the biases that you have. Advocate where possible for better policies. Demand more of your leaders and people in power position. Vote. Do something. Use your voice, your money, your power, your time, and continue to do the work. Continue engaging. Don't be discouraged by mistakes. We all make mistakes. I make mistakes. I've had some Black people look at me like, yo, chill. Right? And I've had to learn. So I think just continue learning and growing in allyship, and understand that it's a continuous process and it changes based on different individuals and their different intersectionalities. What might annoy me might not annoy Hyacinth or Fungi, right? So just be prepared for that difference. But yeah, learn.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So everybody give a round of applause to the speakers today. Thank you so much. You guys have been amazing. Beautiful. So right now we're coming to the audience to ask some questions, and I'm now on view where I can see everybody. And I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is it Nomsibo? You've had your hand up for a while. Is that because you'd like to ask a question? There we go.
Yes.
Hey.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for such an enlightening conversation. It was very lovely to listen to you ladies and get some nuggets of wisdom and perspective. So I have a question here on the issue of white privilege. I'm from Swaziland in Southern Africa. I came here in 2016. I would love to think of myself as someone who was very strong in what I want to do, and I'm still very opinionated. But when I came here, I found myself decapacitated in a way. Not that someone did that specifically, but maybe it's the environment that I am suddenly a minority, something I'd never experienced before in my life. And I feel that, or I felt that I could not dream as high as I used to, or envision myself becoming what I had always envisioned myself to be. And then the question then is, or my hypothesis of that, is that, oh, maybe it's because I'm in an environment where these conversations are an everyday thing, or an everyday experience, so much that I feel like I experience the same thing even without having experienced it. And so that's just my hypothesis, I don't know. So the question is, to immigrants, and in this case to Black people and the other minority groups, how can we take, or how can we better take responsibility for the happenings in our lives on a daily basis? Where do I draw the line to say, no, that should have been me, and actually own up to it? If there is a straitjacket kind of a recommendation for that. I have just recently started doing that with myself. But how can you communicate the same thing or the same concept to millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people to draw the line? There is the line where white privilege begins, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but in my opinion, there is that line. But everything before then, it is up to me as an individual, whether I'm Black or what. So that's my question. How can we take responsibility in navigating the white privilege line or Black privilege? Of course, I don't know if that exists, but
yeah. Thank you so much for your question. Thank you. Great. Could I ask, well, who of the panel would like to answer that first of all? Let me not specify anybody. Chison, go ahead.
See, it's thank you for that question. It's a difficult one because it has a lot to do with, I want to sit here and say, you know, you're the master and the finisher of your own life, and you know, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it tells me my microphone has changed. Okay, I think that in your question also lies the answer. At some point, you need to take some level of control and hold space for yourself. I think that, of course, coming from a country where you are a majority and finally finding yourself in Norway where you are a minority, you don't feel seen, or you might not be seen in society. But that should not limit your ability to do. Because one of the things I do say, and I will not say this in the US or maybe other countries, but in Norway, is why Norway might not necessarily help you, it will not stand in your way, right? So if there is something that you need to do, if you feel that you're being passed over, looked over, speak up. Because sometimes we also make assumptions that people are doing this to us because of the color of my skin. And it is probably true, but it's also probably true that they are completely unaware of whatever it is you're feeling or what your reality is. So I think the line has to be when you've had enough. Ideally, you shouldn't take it, period. But I'm also aware that depending on the culture you come from, depending on your personality traits, you might be more of a conflict averse. I don't want to speak up and do this. So I recognize that intersectionality has a lot to do with when you speak up, when you start to take space, and when you are fed up. But being fed up is a really good place to start and then make a change. And whatever that is for you, do it for yourself. Don't expect somebody else to do it for you. Don't blame other people for not getting opportunities. Go out and take what you need legally.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that answer, Chison. Brilliant as always. Now I'm going to come to Kat. Kat Morn, you would like to ask a question?
Hi, yes. I have ADHD, so I have a tendency to do like 5 things at once. I'm actually making macarons in the oven.
Oh.
And I assumed the way life goes that it would be my turn to ask a question when they were ready. They're not quite ready yet. Okay. I am aware of the irony of being a white woman asking the only white woman on the panel a question, and I apologize for that.
No apologies needed. Ask away.
Sorry. So I work sort of one level below the C-suite, and I'm not Norwegian, and I found that Norwegians generally don't want to acknowledge racism in the first place. They think that Norway is some kind of fucking utopia, and it's not. It's quite a racist place coming from Australia, which is a very racist place. So my question for you, Astrid, is how do you get the C-suite on board with diversity, inclusion, those kind of ideas when they don't even want to acknowledge the elephant?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and thank you for asking that. I mean, anyone who isn't willing to listen to the conversation around DEIB at the moment is they're not going to make it. I mean, the evidence is there to suggest that. So I think that where I would start is anecdotally having the conversations, using the case studies of companies that are doing this. I always tend to think that the States, the UK, and even Australia, they are well ahead of Norway when it comes to DEIB work. This is something Chison and I have spoken about. There are still people here that think it just boils down to gender and that's it. It's just about equality on gender, and these other layers, these other intersectionalities, they're just like, oh, what do you mean? Well, we're not a racist country. We don't have that. So I think that there's a bit of a myth. I agree with you that there isn't racism here. And I think you need to just keep on trying. And I would certainly, when it comes to C-suite, I think bring the research to them, show them what other companies are doing. I think, who did I mention? Cisco and Accenture. There are tons of other companies making great strides with DEIB programs, and by great strides, I mean that they've got healthy, inclusive workforces. They're, really nailing innovation. It's something that we should all be doing, but if those people on the C-suite need an extra nudge, you need to point them towards the case in point that it's been inextricably linked to profitability of companies as well. So that's a place to start. The case studies, the information, and really no one in 2021 should be closing that door. I mean, we are really past that. So just persevere, hang on in there and persevere. Chison, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that as well.
Well, actually, I'm going to move on. No, it's okay. Thank you for asking, Chison. But we've got a few people that would like to ask some questions. So just because of time, I'm just going to move on. So Marta's asked, what are some books that you would recommend or you would describe as eye-opening and educating? Just quickly, and on the panel, you could throw out what the book that you were reading earlier, Astrid, that you mentioned.
That's Cherie Atchison, and it's called Demanding More. Yeah, I bought one for Chison as well. It's really good. She's a woman of color. She's a software engineer, so she's coming from the perspective of tech. There's also another really good book called, and it's not just for white people, but it is called What White People Can Do Next by Emma Dabiri, From Allyship to Coalition. It's a really short read, but really, really great. I've also read something recently called Me and White Supremacy. It's by Layla F. Saad, and it's got lots of exercises at the end of each chapter. Me and White Supremacy, Layla F. Saad. And Kalwant Bhopal has written a book called White Privilege, The Myth of a Post-Racist Society. That's also around the topic and the context of what we've discussed today, privilege, allyship, power. A really great read on white privilege and the intricacies behind it.
Well,
I recommend
thank you so much.
June Saprong, Diversify.
Mm-hmm.
And Feminism for the 99%, by Chinza T. I'm probably destroying her name, and Nancy, Feminism for the 99%. Good books.
Okay, fantastic. What we will do is this list of books that we've just mentioned now, we will send out in the follow-up email as well, just so that you have that written down in the list. Okay, so we have Lena and we have Andy that would like to ask questions. And we also have Tatiana, and I don't really think we're going to have much more time for anybody else. So Lena, we're going to come to you first.
Thanks. First of all, I really want to say thank you because it was, I had goosebumps all the time. It was really about my experience a lot. And I have a question for you, Astrid. You were talking about toxic workplace. I had that experience in full, and I didn't have any answer from the owners of the place about management being absolutely sexist and using the fact that you are not Norwegian. So I left. It's just that now I have this constant bit of feeling that some other people they are there, they having the same problems I had. And is there anything I can do to stop that?
Just so I understand, thanks for your question, by the way. The people that are there now are having the same experiences that you are, and it's a kind of discrimination, sort of gender discrimination or sexism. Did you say it was?
Yeah.
I'm really sorry for your situation. It sounds horrendous. I mean, yeah, sure. If you're in touch with them, you can advise them. I mean, why wouldn't you? That's allyship. If they are unaware of what it's like, then of course you should let them know how toxic it is. Perhaps you could also encourage them to take it further. I think in one of the topics earlier, I mentioned going to an employee representative. You can do that anonymously in Norway, or going to the LDO and taking it there. They can give some really good and concrete advice around what you can do within the parameters of the labour laws here. So they are able to help and advise individuals on a personal basis. It's a difficult role for you because you've obviously got that sort of emotional pull. You've experienced it yourself. I guess you have to hope that they follow your lead as well eventually. Based on what you say, it sounds like it's pretty bad. I'm sorry to hear that, but this isn't unusual. There are still a lot of toxic workplaces out there, and I just end by saying I think you should be really proud of yourself that you had the strength and the foresight to get out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I hope that answered your question, Lena. Andy, we're going to come to you. We have 12 more minutes. So Andy, your question, please.
Thank you, and thank you all, everybody on the panel and everybody today. It's been really, really informative discussion. I have a quick question about normative values and apologetics. This relates a little bit to what some of the other people had discussed about sort of racism within Norway. And I really want to get a sense of, what do you think is what should we expect as normal? Because this is something that has bothered me quite a lot, really, ever since I moved here, because when I've observed, or heard things that were racist, I would usually then gets followed up by a certain set of apologetics, which goes something like, well, Norway hasn't had quite as much migration as other countries, or they haven't had as long to adapt to things. So the implicit assumption there is, okay, well, if we wait 150 years, everything will be okay. And that's not really a practical strategy. It sort of implies that by virtue of being Norwegian, you are exempt from going through this process of self-analysis and self-awareness, which I think that should be the normative value. That shouldn't be a kind of a thing you do at the weekend. That's just, part of the being human thing. But the rarity of the discussion is such that I find myself really quarreling with myself about what should I expect the normal to be, and how do we, as people who have moved to Norway and as people who obviously want to form connections and engage with Norwegians, what extent should we be adjusting our expectations, and versus what extent are adjusting those expectations part of the damaging process?
Okay, so you asked quite a lot of questions there, Andy. So what would you specifically like answered? Bear in mind we were short on time.
Yeah. Okay, so normative value. What should we expect as normative?
Okay.
Cultural understanding from our Norwegian friends.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Love to hear Fungi's take on this from her perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Chison. Thanks, Andy, for a very interesting question. And I think, what is normative? I think we have to change that, because I think we've all experienced it. I'm sure Chison has, and I'm sure Chison has, where you're like, oh gosh, okay, this person said that, and how do I deal with that? Because in a different context, in Zimbabwe, I would call them out and I would say you are racist and da-da-da-da, right? It's completely easy, but this is not my context. So, and in Scotland, I would also be able to say very clearly that that's not acceptable. But Norway is different. And I think that has to change. I think Norway has to wake up, and when something is not okay to say, it's not okay to say. And we have to stand there and say it. I had somebody who said the other day, I gave a presentation about racism and Black Lives Matter, et cetera. And then he said, oh, but race has been biologically disproved. A child from Bergen can get bullied in Oslo because they have a different accent. And I said to him respectfully, that is not the point. The point is my child with a darker skin color is still going to have a different experience from your white-skinned child, even if he has red hair or a Bergensk accent. So, and I said this respectfully, but I said it firmly. So I think we have to say, we can't keep making excuses and say, well, let's wait another 100 years for Norway to catch up. We don't want Norway to catch up. We want Norway to be different. We want Norway to learn from the mistakes that all the other countries have made. And we, as the outsiders, can come in and respectfully say, and I think it's important to be respectful here, because one, it's always important to be respectful, but I think it's also important to be respectful so you don't get brushed off, they don't shut down on you. And especially you, Andy, I assume you're white. I think I can't see you, but I think as a white person, I think you can come in with that different perspective and kind of helps raise awareness and get people thinking about some of these things. And one of the things that Norwegians have said, white Norwegians have said, is that there isn't enough discussion. And it would probably be easier for them to talk to you about this than to talk to me. because with me, then they get all defensive and all the walls go up. But it would be much easier to be open and honest with you. So that's why I guess this allyship thing comes in. You guys as non-Norwegian, immigrants can come in with a different perspective and help open up the arena for some of these discussions so that by the time they get to us, it's a little bit easier. So that would be my perspective on that. I hope that was useful.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Thank you so much, Fungi. Thank you. And then I think the last question that we're going to be able to fit in for the day, Tatiana, we're coming to you.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hey. My question actually has to do with the fact that on my mom's side of the family, they're all from and live in the south of the US, more specifically Louisiana. And while they're very vocal about their, for example, political views on Facebook and everything like that, and they were very anti-Black Lives Matter, they were very all lives matter. And I don't know how to bring up a constructive conversation with my grandparents, for example, who are my elders. And I find myself even shaking just thinking about having that conversation with them. I just don't know how to bring it up, but it's something that matters to me and I do want to do something about it. I'm not finding the courage just right yet to do so. But I think it's important to have that conversation. I just wonder if you have any advice on how to get it started instead of just passively aggressively posting my views on Facebook so that they'll see them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tatiana. That's a great question. Who would like to answer that in the panel?
I can give it a very quick start, but then I'd really like Chison and Fungi to respond as well. But that's a really good question, really honest, really brave of you. I do have white friends that have also struggled with similar situations, having racist family. That's the issue. How do you call it out? How do you address it? How do you help them to unlearn? And it's very much a personal situation, because I know several cases of friends that have actually fallen out with their family. This has driven deep wedges between them. I've got a very close friend of mine that still has no contact with her family at all. I think you have to try with the conversation. And the best advice I can give you is to say that is not going to be comfortable. So prepare yourself for the discomfort before you have the conversation. Go in boldly and go in bravely. And I think I mentioned earlier, the pain and the discomfort of where you are now with that, oh, how do I do this? I think that is far worse than going in and saying, this is how I feel and I disagree with you. And the reasons why I disagree with you are this and this and this. Chison, have you got anything to add to that?
Thank you, Astrid.
Fungi, what do you think?
You're on mute.
Yeah, okay, sorry. What I was thinking was that maybe try and find out where their prejudices, where their racism comes from. Because I think when we start by telling them what we think, the walls go up. So maybe say, but grandma, grandpa, why do you think that? What is it that has led you to think that? So you're listening to them and listening and asking them for their perspective. So you're kind of putting the power in there. And then once people tend to relax, like, okay, she's going to listen to us, then hopefully, then you can start maybe to unpick some of their misconceptions as you have this discussion. But I think try and understand where they're coming from. Because sometimes you find a lot of the stuff that they believe is based on really ignorance. So that would be my starting point.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you very much.
And I can just follow that, Tati, and say there's a lot that can be achieved by asking questions. And I know you very well, and you're curious, and you address even the most difficult conversations from a space of curiosity and humility. And I think that's where you need to start. You know, Louisiana is in the South of America next to Mississippi. So, you know, I think contextualizing that and trying to, one, understand their personal lived experience. And I find that in having these conversations, well, I don't have conversations about racism, say, with my family or my loved ones, because, well, we're mostly all Black. Well, my immediate family, not my married into family. I find that these conversations get difficult when talking about homosexuality, transgender people from different religions. And it's really just unbottling that conversation and ask, you know, oftentimes it comes from fear. So I think if you can assess where that fear comes from for them, you might actually gain more empathy and also hopefully get them to see your perspectives, because I know that you have people in your life that are of color that you love incredibly, right?
Absolutely.
So start with the questions.
I think that's great advice. Thank you so much, all three of you.
And I just throw in my 2 cents as well and say, you know, after asking all of the questions and understanding their perspective, I'd maybe just give a suggestion of using storytelling. Storytelling is very powerful. So if you humanize a person rather than just the whole nations of people, but humanize a situation, a story, get them to really see an individual, to kind of understand that when you bring in the human aspect and it's really personal, sometimes it helps somebody to have compassion.
Absolutely.
But when it's very general, then it's difficult.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Well, that perfectly rounded us up to 3 o'clock, and we are at the end of this conversation now. Who could go on and chat some more? I know that I could. Emma's like, yay. Susanna, I'm sorry I didn't ask your question. Thank you, everybody, for all your comments. Thank you, Adebayo. You've been very active commenting. You've been very helpful. Emma, you've been great. Kat, you know, all you guys have been so wonderful. Gina, you know, thank you guys. I know many of you are repeat attendees, and we just really love that you are with us. And, you know, we want to continue the conversation. There will be another session in June, but then we will have a break in July and we'll return in August. So Nikki will be sharing with you the details of the next event, and we will send out a follow-up email as we always do. We will include all of the resources that we've mentioned to you here today and any other resources that we didn't get a chance to mention with any questions that we didn't get to cover. But thank you so much. We appreciate every single one of you, and we love you guys. Thank you so much. Enjoy. Have a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you. And we will see you. Nikki, what was the next date? June
23rd.
23rd. June 23rd. Okay, thank you so much to Fungi, who was a panelist with us for the first time today. You were exceptional. Thank you. You were really great. Astrid, you were, as per usual, lovely, beautifully eloquent. Thank you so much. And Chison, thank you for just being so candid and so open and just exhibiting such power in how you shared with us today. Thank you. Thank you all.